Climate Synopsis. No triumph for Trump. Is this the end of American exceptionalism? Confirming his repeated signals, President Trump decided to reassert America's sovereignty and abandon the Paris Agreement. His speech declared it to be a draconian accord that was very unfair at the highest level, costing a vast fortune, and President Trump suggests that he can negotiate a better deal. Vice President Pence emphasized that the issue is about American jobs. Secretary of Defense James Mattis said Mr. Trump was wide open and the president's mind was pulled in every direction. But contrary reports by the Washington Post offered insider details on the debates, saying that the president, who is suspicious of global agreements, simply stayed where he's always been and played to his voter base. Fox News called the decision brave, and it might even be good politics. But cynics see the whole circus as just another reality game show program. Call it Will We Stay or Will We Go?, hosted by a media-hungry president. As USA Today explained, time will tell whether the nation just stepped on the accelerator to global catastrophe, or whether, as the Heartland Institute claims, the adieu to Paris will unleash more fossil fuel resources and power our future prosperity. The decision surely seems to contradict the advice of national security experts. But the fossil fuel industry might be pleased because while the nation frets over climate policy, the administration announced an increase in oil drilling in Alaskan wilderness too. Perhaps selfishness and rising tribalism is at work. Other nations are doing their share while the United States acts as if it can go it alone. The result is an us against them mentality, and in truth, the rejection of Paris is implicitly President Trump's way of rejecting the left wing on an issue that is splitting the country. His speech framed the matter as a struggle between obstructionists and non-obstructionists. Tucker Carlson was explicit about his own tribalism, purportedly destroying liberal hypocrisy by pointing out that celebrities fly in carbon-burning private jets, while missing the point that collaboration by everyone is more important than ever. Other conservatives ridicule the war of the climate monsters and the unhinged people who are engaged in climate jihad and who will inevitably turn violent. For now, the decision is done, and without the United States federal government helping the process, the goals of the Paris Agreement become harder to reach. Politicians and diplomats voiced anger and frustration. Perhaps historians will one day understand how we got here. Politico and others say that an outspoken and empowered Environmental Protection Agency administrator, Scott Pruitt, and an uncompromising White House advisor, Steve Bannon, simply outsmarted Ivanka Trump during her terrible, horrible, no-good, very bad week. Some analysts blame the Republican Party and conservative movement for resisting all forms of carbon regulation, and the statements by Mitchell McConnell and Paul Ryan support the claim. The New York Times notes that the GOP viewpoint may be a reaction to the hubris of the Democratic Party and policies proposing a carbon tax. Still others blame the media, whose annual coverage of climate change has continued to decline. But right now, as supporters of the Paris Agreement resume their echo-grieving anew, anger is prevalent. House Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer accused the president of an abdication of American leadership. Senator Al Franken called it a stupid decision and an existential threat to the planet. Former Secretary of State John Kerry said that the president clearly doesn't know what he's talking about, and while the president may or may not still think climate change is a hoax, Mr. Kerry's accusation has support. The MIT scientist who President Trump cited in his talking points says the president's statement suggested a complete misunderstanding of the climate problem. Fact-checking by the Associated Press, CBS News, and the Washington Post also revealed an abundance of errors. In response to Mr. Trump and his claim that he can negotiate a better deal, many of the 195 nations that signed the Paris Accord have been defiant. International commentators have called this climate Brexit, a historical mistake to make America gray again. Trade deals can become more complicated. The French view Mr. Trump is isolating the U.S. from the world and created new videos criticizing the announcement. German Chancellor Angela Merkel is looking to a future without Mr. Trump and labeled the United States short-sighted. African leaders are concerned about the loss of funding for important projects, and some people suggest that President Trump may have been misinformed about the Green Climate Fund, the voluntary payments being made by other nations, and the measures used to ensure accountability. Searching for hope, people expect Asia to embrace a planet-first philosophy, with leadership coming from a somewhat reluctant China and an eager India. Then again, neither of them have been paying into the Green Climate Fund either. Global leadership is undergoing a chaotic transition. Once upon a time, the United States was an environmental leader with a full understanding of how pollution harmed the economy. But this week, some writers have characterized the United States as a rogue nation, joining with Russia once again. In fact, only Syria and Nicaragua formally opposed the Paris Agreement. Even conservative columnist Cal Thomas offered caution about the emerging and unhealthy rift between Europe and the United States. Newt Gingrich may see the decision as just a way to restart negotiations, but scientists are concerned, because not only could the United States continue its polluting ways, but other nations could follow. Could this render irrelevant the American presidency? On the issue of climate change, President Trump does not speak for all Americans, and some people are choosing to act as though he does not even matter. In light of the U.S. withdrawal, Michael Bloomberg pledged $15 million to support the United Nations and the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau noted that only the federal government of the United States had left the agreement. Al Gore is updating his inconvenient sequel to communicate directly with his audiences. Former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger thinks the grassroots movement cannot be stopped. The European Union refuses to renegotiate with the White House, and the leader of the United Nations, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, offered this blunt view. The sustainability train has left the station. Get on board or get left behind. Those who fail to bet on the green economy will be living in a gray future. Those who embrace green technologies will set the gold standard for economic leadership in the 21st century. After hearing of President Trump's decision, local leaders in California insisted they would redouble their own climate efforts, launching an architecture and design competition. The mayors of 187 cities and counting signed an open letter saying they will adopt, honor, and uphold the commitments and goals in the Paris Agreement. State governors are making similar commitments, and many states and cities have begun the climate adaptations. Strategies involving white reflective roofs and quality soils to sequester carbon can reduce the heat island effect. Local governments are dealing with the realities of disaster planning, preparing, mitigating, responding, and assessing damage. New York issued climate resiliency design guidelines to ensure that city projects are ready for the changing world. Galveston, aware of its own flooding history, is bracing for the ways that sea level rise will intensify surging stormy seas. But climate resilience is costly, and, no surprise, the C40 group of megacities trying to assert climate leadership is running out of cash. Ultimately, the marketplace must help to invest in and even drive climate policy. In the business world, many companies and leaders flatly disagree with President Trump's decisions and actions, and they're speaking out. Jeff Immelt, head of GE, says simply climate change is real. Tesla's Elon Musk and Disney's Robert Iger will be resigning from federal advisory councils. Other CEOs are being pressured to do the same. Perhaps these industry titans can find time to solve a different problem. Silicon Valley investment in clean technology innovation has declined in recent years. So as a Wall Street Journal op-ed observed, leaving the Paris Accord may be like skipping church, because in the end, technology and markets, not policy or morality, will find the solutions to the carbon problems. Still, state regulators and litigators are trying to accelerate the changes in the business world. Shareholders are demanding climate disclosures from Exxon and criticizing the company for funding climate denial. And the New York State Attorney General is pursuing an investment and fraud case. Exxon, however, is pushing back, but the trend is clear. Fidelity Investments is planning to support shareholder proxy proposals that demand sustainability reporting by companies, and business will eventually fill the vacuum in climate leadership. Savvy business schools are launching climate initiatives, and in the future, CEO might be synonymous with Chief Environmental Officer. Or is this the end of the world as we know it? And I feel fine. With or without Paris, the relentless news coverage of the effects of climate change remain unchanged. A massive crack in an Antarctic ice shelf grew 11 miles in just 6 days, and it will increase the amount of coming sea level rise. Other ongoing events include declining apple orchard production in India, rising vanilla prices due to Madagascar's weather, and Greenland's Rink Glacier experiencing radically different and rapid melting. Basic facts are changing, like the chemistry of the ocean and the regional cycles of flood and drought. The Great Barrier Reef is dying, and the Svalbard Global Seed Vault is flooded. Legislation is being passed to deal with flooding neighborhoods, and entire Alaskan communities must relocate due to rising seas. Facts are facts, even if people intuitively prefer to believe alternative fictions. Climate science is not a belief system. It is learned and verifiable through experiment and analysis. Almost daily in peer-reviewed publications, scientists terminate some of the uncertainties associated with the climate predictions. Temperatures are warming more slowly in Antarctica because so much of the continent is at higher elevations. Thawing permafrost in the warming Arctic releases far more nitrous oxide than expected, increasing the threats of climate change and ozone layer depletion. A Rutgers study found that stony corals are more adaptable to ocean acidification than originally thought. The long-term forecasts, increasingly well-informed, remain disturbing. Scientific predictions this week include mass migration and relocation of animal species, new bleaching of the Hawaiian coral reefs, more intense weather and flooding in Maine, and changes in the supply of potatoes in Japan. Come 2100, cities could be hotter by as much as 8 degrees Celsius, leading to declines in economic productivity. And whether they care to admit it or not, people are already noticing the changing weather patterns. Americans no longer have Paris, so the question is, what comes next? Individuals can do things to reduce their carbon emissions, but if we don't, and all the ice melts, which will take a long time, the country becomes hard to recognize. So the United Arab Emirates have their own answer. They intend to colonize Mars by 2117.